is a lot of behind the scenes work. It is long hours. It is one of the most detail-oriented business I have ever looked at. It's just so management intensive.
Hi, welcome back to How Much Can I Make? I'm your host, Mirav Ozeri. Ever dream of completely flipping your career? Our guest today, Nicole Cawley, actually did just that. After 20 years in corporate banking, she pivoted completely and is now the co-owner of 3 Yum Yum Noodle Bars in the Hudson Valley. So, what does it take to jump into the restaurant world? Let's find out from Nicole. Thank you so much for doing it and sharing your time and knowledge.
My pleasure. I'm flattered.
Great. So let's dive right in. You had a huge pivot from corporate banking to co-owning restaurants. What did you do in corporate banking, and what was the journey like that you ended up as a co-owner of restaurants?
I was a corporate banker. I was what's called an originator, which is that I originated new deals for the institutions that I worked for, the banks that I worked for. And I did both debt and equity financings, and I specialized in the media, telecom, and entertainment.
Basically buying companies?
Industries. Some of it was acquisition work, but a lot of it was also construction work. At the time that I entered the banking industry, the early stages of cable companies still building out cable networks, cable television networks, still building out a lot of coverage across the country. And cell phones were really just beginning to come onto the marketplace. So all of those cell phone networks were brand new and were still being constructed. So we did a lot of that type of project finance. I also financed TV and radio station acquisitions, outdoor advertising, newspaper publishing.
So from that, you became a co-owner of restaurants. How did this come about?
I spent 20 years in the corporate banking industry, and I lived through the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. It was a very traumatic experience. A lot of bad things were happening in the finance world, and I wanted to get out. I didn't want to be a part of that. I wanted to make a change, and I had a kind of fantasy for many years about going to the Culinary Institute, and I'd always kind of wondered if I could do it at that professional level. And when the Lehman Brothers thing happened, I was just like, maybe this is a really insane time. The world seems to be falling apart. So, what the hell? I'm just going to apply to the CIA and see if they accept me. And they did. And I matriculated in January of 2010 and spent 2 years there. I got my associate's degree.
So what was it like all of a sudden being a student again?
It was shocking. Not so much because of the learning curve, but just because you go to a place like the CIA, and they don't really, not only do they have no understanding of what I had done previously, they have a mindset, I would say, at least at that time, that everybody is a late teens and early 20s student who needs to be whipped into shape. A lot of my chefs instructors were former Marines, for example, who had a sort of boot camp mentality about the whole thing. And it really was like joining the Army. It was very regimented, had a set course of instruction, and it really didn't deviate for anybody. It wasn't like you had electives or you could take this and that. You did the program, and it was either baking and pastry or it was savory cooking, and whichever one you chose, everybody did the same thing.
But what was your dream? Was your dream to become a chef?
My plan ultimately was to own restaurants, because by that point, I was already old enough to be my classmates' parent. I wasn't going to be cooking in a restaurant kitchen, 12 hours a day at that stage of life, right? But I wanted to be able to combine my business expertise, my financial expertise, and my culinary interests and run a business. So that was kind of the goal. And, when I graduated in September of 2011, it wasn't clear. I had to look around, right? It wasn't like you just walked out and said, oh, well, hey, I'm going to start a restaurant. It had to be the right opportunity. And I got introduced to my business partner a couple of years later. Originally, I was brought in by her then business partner, to be the chief financial officer of the company. Ultimately, we took out the business partners, the other 2 partners, and Eric and I had a meeting of the minds, and we felt we would be better suited.
You and her became partners focus on the one restaurant that she had?
Well, no, there were two restaurants at that time. There was Yum Yum Woodstock and Yum Yum Kingston. So we had the two restaurants already, and we're 50-50 owners in the business. Then we opened another Yum Yum together in Red Hook across the river.
And how did you determine that she would be the right person for you to invest in?
Our various expertises are very compatible. Like she's been cooking in professional kitchens since she was 15 years old when she was still in high school. And she's had a number of restaurants. She's worked in other people's restaurants. She's owned another restaurant of her own. She's had a huge amount of experience and understands how to operate a kitchen, how to purchase things, how to manage a staff, how to hire, all of those operating things. And I had the financial expertise. And so I understood, about financing a business. I understood about accounting. I understood about regulatory side of things, all of that. So our areas of competence work very well together. We kind of cover all the bases.
Are you involved in the day-to-day operation of the restaurant at all? The menu,
Yes.
the food?
I'm not cooking in the restaurant at all. There was a point where we had a food truck that we operated in the summers, and she and I would work that together. But mostly my stuff is behind the scenes. It's all the financial and tax filings and all of that kind of thing. Regulatory stuff, permit renewals.
When you decided to invest, were you looking more into the financial health of the business or into the value for the community, the kind of food and all of that?
Both of it. I mean, I just, by the time I became an owner in the business, a co-owner, I could see the potential for the business. It works very, very well. It was something that you could scale up. So from a business perspective, it was very attractive, from a growth perspective. The economics of it just made sense. We run a very lean ship. The menu works very well. There's a lot of optionality in it. Having three restaurants that are the same concept, that works very well. It would be much harder if we had three restaurants that were three different concepts, for example. The purchasing would be different, the staffing would be different, everything would be different.
I always hear that it's the worst business to get into.
Well, it's a funny thing because I think people sometimes have very glamorous and unrealistic ideas about what owning a restaurant is going to be like. I think they think it's going to be, this wonderful sort of nightlife kind of thing where you go and, everyone's
Right.
looks beautiful and your friends come and see you and you're hanging out and, being like an impresario. And, the reality is not that. It is a lot of behind the scenes work. It is long hours. It is one of the most detail oriented business I have ever looked at. And I say that from a banker perspective. It's just so management intensive. So many things can go wrong. You can have staff who doesn't show up or who quits on you unexpectedly, or you could have theft, or you could have, just costs that spiral out of control, or so many things. Equipment always breaks down. Trash removal can be problematic.
How about food safety?
Food safety is another thing. You have to be all over that, absolutely all over that. And we've been fortunate in that we have a very good relationship with the health departments in the two counties we operate in, Ulster and Dutchess. But you have to be on it all the time, and you have to train new staff, all of them, in the proper ways of handling and storing food and preparing food, because otherwise you could end up with a huge problem.
So as far as your work, do you go throughout the week to all three restaurants, check them out? How often do you do that?
Well, I'm there at least once a week at every single restaurant, and usually several times more than that, because I'm there to, pick up cash deposits, pick up invoices, because I take care of all of that stuff as well. You're always looking around to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that the place is clean, all the things that you would expect, really. It has to be a place that is attractive for people to come into and feel like they're going to have a wonderful experience with a good quality meal.
Do you also sell liquor in the restaurants?
Yes, we have full liquor licenses in all three restaurants.
Oh, that's the moneymaker in a restaurant, right?
Well, actually, you'd be surprised. We are, to a certain extent, really a family restaurant. We have a kids menu. It's just not the place you're going to go if you're looking to tie one on. You're going to go to a different kind of bar. Yum Yum is a family place more than anything else, I would say.
Did it give you the appetite to open another one and another one? Is it like making money by the numbers?
Well, I will tell you, our initial plan had been to continue to open restaurants. And what has happened over the last decade is that, the immigration policies in this country have become so draconian that it is very difficult to find qualified kitchen staff. And what we find is a lot of Americans don't want to do that work. If we were to open another place, I would be reluctant to buy or rent a space only to discover and then equip it with a kitchen and, all the decor and everything, only to find that we couldn't staff that kitchen. And you're never going to know that until a month or so before you open the restaurant, because you don't hire staff months in advance. You hire it shortly before the opening.
So, the argument we always hear, oh, Americans will work for the right price. Is that correct? I mean, or is it impossible to find somebody that want to do the kind of work?
The work is very physically demanding, and that's true for both front and back of the house, but especially for back of the house. You're talking about close quarters, lifting a lot of heavy stuff. You're standing on your feet all day, food preparation, sharp knives, flames. It's very demanding on the body. And I think there are a lot of people who just don't want to do that physical kind of work. It's hot. There's a lot of pressure when we're very busy. For all those reasons, I think it's not everybody's cup of tea, right? And I think there are a lot of people who just wouldn't want to do that work at any price.
So if somebody want to start a restaurant, a small restaurant, let's say, in this environment, what advice would you give them?
I would say, first of all, restaurants really have to be your passion, because it is going to be all consuming. It is going to be your life. That's the first thing. And then the second thing I would say is get a partner or partners who have complementary skills to what you know how to do. Because, a lot of people go into this, they've been chefs at other people's restaurants. And that's a great skill to have. You understand the operating side of how a kitchen runs, but you may not be a person who knows anything about finance or tax or accounting or, any of the million other things that you need to be aware of in order to run a successful business. And if you don't have those skills, you need to find somebody who does, because you are going to need it. You're going to need it in-house. And you are also going to need, to have a good accounting firm. You're going to need a good lawyer, all the things to make things run smoothly. Or running a restaurant as a business is different than, oh, I know how to cook.
By the way, do you own the buildings your restaurants are in, or is it all rental?
We own our flagship in Woodstock. Yes, we bought that building 5 years ago.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. And I would just make that point about, when you asked about people getting into the restaurant business, I would say that when you are in the restaurant business, you should also be in the real estate business, because the value of your franchise is based on whether you can be in the place that you're in, right? To a large extent. If you're dependent on a lease and your landlord doesn't renew your lease, you don't have a business, right? It goes away. And then all you've got is equipment. But if you own your properties and you can continue to operate on an ongoing basis and you control your destiny in that way, you have a very valuable business.
Now that you look back, is there anything you would have done differently before you got in?
I'm not sure that there is actually. It sort of worked out in an almost magical kind of way that Erica and I found each other as business partners, because the fit is so good. I couldn't ask for a better business partner. And, we have been through a lot of things in the last 10 years. We've opened a restaurant together. We've been through COVID, which was a whole exercise in itself. We've had a number of challenges along the way, that any one of which could have tanked a business.
What was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge was probably taking out her business partners, followed by COVID, I would say.
Ooh, yeah. So what is the big reward?
Well, the big reward is that it is extremely satisfying to feel like you are running a business successfully. I never get tired of running into people or being introduced to people who say, oh, you own Yum Yum? We love Yum Yum. We go all the time. It's just so gratifying. It's hard to explain how gratifying that is. And they'll tell you what their favorite meal is, or, whatever. All of that is really, really satisfying. You have a feeling of controlling your own destiny more when you own your own business, right? The buck stops there. If you screw up, it's on you. If you figure something out that works really well, that's on you too, right? When I think of the many, many hours I spent in the corporate world going to meetings where in hindsight, you're just going, oh my God, like what a waste of time. Like, some
Right.
new corporate initiative or some administrative thing. And we just don't have that. When we have meetings, it's because we really need to have a meeting.
You do have delicious food. I love the pad thai, but more, and the salad that you have there with the quinoa, I think it is. But my favorite is by far the buns. Those are addictive.
They are addictive.
They're totally
Absolutely
addictive.
addictive. I'm with you. I think that's probably my favorite thing too. Followed by, I have to put in a plug for our burger. Nobody normally thinks of that as Asian cuisine, obviously,
Right.
but I would put our burger up against anybody's burger. We serve it with spicy mayo and kimchi, and it is so juicy and delicious. It is just,
Oh, I'm drooling already.
it's really good.
You mentioned the successful business. How do you measure success in your life today? Is it the business making money? Is it the community, your own fulfillment? How do you measure success?
It's really a little bit of all of that. Financial success is sort of, the first obvious metric, right? You can't have a successful business if you're losing money, right? Like that is not a sustainable situation. And, we've been fortunate, I think, in that, we run a tight ship. That's something I know how to do, right? I spent years as a banker looking at people's business plans and are they making the money they should be making? So I know how to do that. Constantly looking at ways to tweak, refine, lower costs, improve revenues, whatever the thing is to keep that going. But, the other thing is that it takes a village to do this, right? It's not just me and Erica. We have a staff of 50 people probably.
Wow.
And yeah, and that's a pretty lean staff.
If somebody want to open a small restaurant, I don't know how many seaters, like 20 seats, 20 people, 30 people, something like that. What kind of investment they need? But mostly I'm interested to know in how much money can they actually make in a restaurant like this. Let's say everything works perfectly. They got the staff, they got a good cook and good reviews. How much money can a 20-seat restaurant make?
Yeah, 20 seats is a little tough, I have to say. I personally, I would not do a 20-seat restaurant.
What would you do?
But we should probably back up there and say, it depends what your concept is, right? Because the world sort of divides down into, you had very fine dining, you have the level below that is excellent, but not completely haute cuisine. Then you have, family restaurants, you have takeout places, there's a whole range of thing that you could do, right? And the margins for that business, the cash flow margins are different depending on what it is you do. To take an extreme example, if you have a real fine dining restaurant, your margins on that are going to be quite slim for the most part because you're using expensive ingredients, you need a lot of staff, you probably need a very fancy decor, beautiful glassware, all the things. And that does not come cheap. When you look at a place like ours, which is kind of mid-range, we're not fast food. It's a contemporary restaurant. In that range, you can probably run margins in the, 20 to 25%, which is reasonable. I mean, we run with a very lean operation. And, there are ways to maximize that so that works for you. We have a lot of ingredients, for example, that, get used in multiple dishes, so that you have a very efficient use of fewer ingredients, right? The sort of how much can you make question. I know we didn't really finish that. I mean, it really depends, obviously, because we have three places, that makes a difference, right? Our combined net income is going to be higher than any one place and controlling your costs and whatnot. But I mean, if you're able to run 20, 25% margin on your business, you can make a very comfortable living.
Well, if you'll own 7 restaurants, you will make even more
And of
money.
course, it depends how many partners you have too, right? Like, not much is the pie being divided.
What is the biggest challenge in keeping the Yum Yum brand going and maintaining it?
It's an interesting question because, we sort of got to a place, we used to worry about like, a lot of advertising and doing a lot of that kind of thing. I think because we're so established now, I mean, the original Yum Yum opened 15 years ago. We just celebrated our 15th anniversary. And I think because we're in smaller towns, villages, people know who we are, right? I mean, consistency is the absolute cornerstone of any restaurant. It doesn't matter what the concept is. If you can consistently deliver dishes that are the same every time, the quality is high, you have pleasant serving staff, it's a pleasant experience, the hours are consistent, all those things, the level of service is high and you feel delighted every time. That's what it takes. And, no amount of advertising is going to make up for things if, people get a pad thai and it's different every time they get
Right.
it,
You got to keep
isn't what they're
consistency.
expecting to get, right? Or the buns aren't right, or whatever it is, something's burnt, or, whatever. Keeping that level of consistency is the single most important thing that any restaurant owner can do to get repeat business. And we rely on repeat business, right? I mean, we don't have expense account clients. People are choosing to spend their own money with us. So, and they're not going to do that if they don't like the food and don't have a nice time when they come to visit us, right?
Right. Where do you see the business going in the next 5 years?
If the immigration policies in this country were to change, we would be open to opening other locations. It would be attractive to us, but we have to be confident that we could staff them. So, do I see us changing, adding a different format in there or doing some new thing? Probably not.
Do you love your life as a restaurant co-owner?
I do. I actually do. And I feel like I've managed to get a balance in there, but it's hard. It's hard. And it's probably harder for my business partner because she has two children, one of whom is still young and at home. And
Oh,
that's a lot to deal with when you're also trying to run three restaurants and you're also cooking in those restaurants.
okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mirav.
Good luck.
I'll
And
see
I'll
you
come
soon.
for a pad thai or the buns.
Let me know.
I will. Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That's a wrap for today. Thanks for listening. If Nicole's stories inspired you or made you hungry, who knows, don't forget to follow us for more real stories, real people, and real jobs. See you next week.